Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Meta Club. This week's race C is one of the most common combinations that we get, but I have a brand new anti-meta for you. Let's get into it. The anti-meta car of the week is the Z4. Once again, an absolutely underrated contender. After the last Bape update, it's secretly become very formidable. The legendary B Racer put this thing actually in 6th place. It has an incredible amount of pace, and I was able to get just barely into the 25s with a 25.960. While the RCZ is the main meta, the Ford, 4C, Citroen, and Ferrari are all extremely good as well, and in fact there are lots of different cars that do work for this race. At the end of the front straight, the track kind of crests, and then there are two kinks. You want to treat it just as one little curve. You want to stay really tight to it. You don't need to go wide for either of these, but after the second one, you go to the middle of the track, and then we're going to look for this little green bollard right here. Your goal is to try to bend the car around it. You're going to look for this yellow part of the fence right here, and at that point you should be turning the other direction. As you turn in, the car will most likely understeer, in which case you want to lift just gently, not all the way, just to get close to these little green bollards right here. After passing those, you're going to add more throttle, but only enough to not push yourself further away from the inside of the track. When you get to the 100 meter board right here, you're going to then transition to full braking. Looking for these marshals here on the side of the track. When your car gets entirely past them, then you can start turning in. Take note of how much brake I'm using. I'm not at max, but I'm still holding a lot of brake pressure until I then get off and add all the final steering. It's much better to miss the apex by a little bit than it is to hit it early by any amount. When you get on the throttle, first gear is best. However, you may slide the tires. If you find them sliding, you can possibly save it by shifting up to second really quickly, but of course, you do not want to slide them at all. As a general rule, the tighter the corner, the longer you're going to be trail braking up to the apex. For the almost straight section, which is the back straight, you want to steer as little as you possibly can and set up so that you brake off the curb and then move onto it after. You don't want to brake until the entirety of your car has passed the beginning of the red and white part of the curb. Braking in a straight line, gradually getting all the way up onto the curb with just your right tires on the asphalt, you want to turn before you get to the end of the curb. Dipping down to first can get the car to rotate really quickly, especially if you turn in late like I did, but it can make it more squirrely when you get on the throttle, and you should get on the throttle in second gear. Make sure you're up on the curb and not in the grass before you then accelerate here and look for these lines at the end of the curb. Stay full throttle initially as you turn in, but when you pass the first of the BBS signs, that's when you're going to want to start lifting off the throttle. You only want to lift off enough that you can get the right tires to go all the way up on the curb without going past and hitting the grass. You should be full throttle in fourth gear by the time you come off that curb, and if you look at this line right here, you can see that you can cut almost straight through the grass as long as your right tires are touching that curb on the outside. Following the inside of the tire marks in the ground, you want to start lifting off so you can get almost all of your car onto the green before you enter the tunnel right here. Once you enter the tunnel, you should be aimed at this yellow chevron in the distance, and at that point you want to hit the brakes heavily. I like to stay full brake and get down to second gear before then starting to turn in before the end of this little short tunnel. Try to avoid this white line because it can give you dirty tires, but you can dip down to first, then get up to second gear and steer very carefully as you then get on the throttle. The camber is a little weird, so you might induce a little bit of oversteer, but if you're careful, you should be able to do it cleanly. Aiming so your right tires are still on the red and white part of the curb as you exit the tunnel, you're going to brake about a car length before that white line. Trail brake quickly. You don't need first gear, but it can get the car to rotate really quickly. It might get it to rotate too quickly though, so be very careful. You don't want to get on the throttle so you're in second gear. Squeezing on as much throttle as I possibly can after that last corner, I look for two specific things. Firstly, I try to aim my car all the way to the left of this curb here on the right. After that, I make sure that I wait till the beginning of the curb to then start turning in, and after I turn in, I lift off only as much as I need to get as close to these inside sausage curbs as I possibly can. You have to be close, but you absolutely do not want to run over these. Getting to full throttle as I come off the curb, I continue steering to the right until I see these little tire marks. At that point, I want to switch directions and lift off afterwards. This next corner is a bit of a trick. You want to put just your right tires on the curb and you want to stay floored on the throttle. That should get you to rotate, and you can shift up to fourth as you start rotating to get yourself to rotate even a little bit more. Staying full throttle and continuing to steer to the left, you want to steer until you're pointed to the left of this curb here on the inside. You're then going to switch directions, putting just your left tires up on that curb, and you've got to continue steering as you go over this crest. Be very careful to continue steering to the right until you know you're going to be clear of this. Keeping your eye on the 50 meter board right here, you're going to wait just till you get to it, and then you're going to hit the brakes really heavily. You'll note that you can actually stay full brake as you turn in, and the car will continue to steer because of Gran Turismo's magical ABS and because of the elevation change. Looking at this patched piece of cement right here, my goal is to be in first gear and completely off the brakes, adding more steering by the time I get to it. You should be then in second gear, squeezing the throttle until you know that you can get full throttle. I got on the throttle a little bit earlier than I thought I should, but even though I went a little bit in the grass, it didn't seem to slow me down very much at all. From here, it's just a straight shot to the end. This is a very, very tricky track, so it's probably going to take you a little bit more time if you're not used to it. This front straight's really tricky, and of course it's not exactly straight, especially with the elevation change in the two kinks, but you just want to really hug the inside right here. You can go a little bit wider to the middle, and that should give you a little bit extra space to turn in, but it's really difficult. You should gradually decelerate until you're ready to hit the brakes really heavily, and then when you turn in, you should note that you should be on the brakes for a really long time, almost all the way to the apex. This car does seem to like being revved out, but if you rev it up all the way before the rev limiter, it does seem to lose a bit of momentum when you shift. As this S is, you want to stay as close to the inside, trying to draw almost a straight line through as much as you possibly can, and then of course set up for this. For some reason, the ABS works really strangely when you go over the curbs, so if you hit the brakes really heavily before you get on the curbs and then move onto the curbs, it should be totally fine. This uphill sector is really tricky. If you apex too early on the inside, then it's actually just going to send you into that really scary part of the wall. And if you go beyond the white line right here, it will probably give you dirty tires. You usually don't want to oversteer, but if you do oversteer a little bit, you can get heavily on the throttle going into that last tunnel, and it should actually help save you from losing too much momentum. That little trick right there is really necessary to keep up a lot of speed. I don't know if you can actually go that fast in that sector without that little bit of rotation, but I haven't been able to go nearly as fast without purposely rotating it on the grass. So good luck if you try it, and if not, then it probably will only cost you a tenth or two. We are once again back to the type of race where you have a required pit stop, but you don't have required tire changes. However, it is a bad idea to not change the tires. I don't know if any car can actually make it and actually be fast overall without changing tires. I don't think it's worth it whatsoever. So instead of just trying to pit at the very beginning or at the very end, depending on where you are, you do want to try to pit away from traffic, but you just have a bit of a pit window. I think pitting anywhere between laps 6 and 9 are probably going to be about equal when it comes to overall pace. If you have traffic in front of you and you absolutely know that you could go faster without them in front of you, but you still struggle to pass them, I would advise pitting as early as lap 5. Conversely, if you find yourself in a situation where people in front of you who you know you can go faster than are pitting lap 9, then it is possible to pit lap 10 as long as you go super fast on your very worn tires, and those people do go slow on their outlap. So to summarize, I do think it's absolutely safe to pit anywhere between lap 6 and 9, but in a pinch, going in lap 5 or lap 10 should be fine as well, especially because this car is pretty good with the tires. And as you can see, it's got a lot of power. Just like in the solo lap, you do not want to shift to 6th gear unless you've got slipstream, in which case you absolutely do want to shift to 6th gear. If you've done this race before, then you know that this hairpin is extremely dangerous for a variety of reasons, and that one right there is one of them. Sometimes people do not know what they're doing and they just completely stop their cars, or almost completely stop it. So if you're really too close like Rush was, then you might get the really weird accordion effect and lose all your momentum. Luckily, it ghosted both of those guys, so I was able to go straight through. Despite the fact that I started in 13th place, there were multiple people who pulled over, and those two at the hairpin also gave me 2 free positions. This uphill right-hand corner is really dangerous all by itself, so when you add fuel and lots of people driving on track, you can see that it can be very dangerous in the race itself. As a general rule, I always assume someone's going to crash there at the hairpin and in this final sector, especially at the very end when you go downhill. That crazy wall that juts out catches a lot of people. And it's not that people are just directly driving into it, they underestimate how much it's going to understeer as they go over this crest. Because the custom slipstream is on, as long as you're within a second of the people in front of you, you're going to get at least a little bit of a boost, but the closer you are, the more boost you're going to get. Not everyone knows this or pays any kind of attention to it, so a lot of people underestimate exactly how early they need to brake going into the hairpin. On top of that, because it's kind of a complex setup, a lot of people end up colliding before the hairpin, and you'll find a lot of people are sliding straight through. So if you see someone in the back, or you see someone behind you sliding into you, or if you get run into here, it's best to wait until after the race to check the replay and really make sure that someone ran into you or if they just got thrown into you, because anything can happen here. Because it's such a complicated corner, a lot of people just do not pay attention to what's going on beyond them, and I don't know if Mad Dog just didn't know I was there, or if he was hoping that he could push me off just enough that it wouldn't look like he was trying to shove me off, but I would still lose momentum. Either way, I didn't really appreciate the contact, but I did appreciate the fact that he didn't shove me all the way off. After Lugnuts kind of Verstapping me right there, I almost just lifted and let Mad Dog go, but then I gave him the benefit of the doubt, and luckily he did actually completely get on the brakes to avoid pushing me in the wall, which again, I really appreciate. I mentioned it just a bit before, but we do have custom slipstream on in this race, and that means two main things. The first thing is, when you have the slipstream, it's going to be an incredibly powerful effect, much more than normal or realistic slipstream. The other thing is, the dirty air isn't going to be nearly as powerful as it usually is. If we had the normal slipstream, if it was really realistic, or at least Gran Turismo's version of realistic, it would be nearly impossible to fall through the final sector in this car at all, regardless of what kind of car was in front. Thanks to the custom slipstream, you can stay really close to pretty much anything, but of course that also means that pretty much anything can use a slipstream and catch up to you, even if they weren't exactly fast in the technical sections. I have to admit that I wasn't really focusing on exactly what was going on when I gave Lugnuts that bump draft, and especially because Lumpy's my boy, I didn't exactly want to help anyone pass Lumpy, but luckily everyone hit the brakes at the right point, and Lumpy gave us a lot of space, so we got one more position, and we moved on. In general, unless I have a really clear picture of exactly who's ahead, and I mean like the 3 or 4 cars ahead, I wouldn't really give a bump draft there, especially because you can actually catch someone when they're turning and it can set them or you completely sideways. While most of the passes are going to happen on either of the straights or into braking zones, there are a few really tricky places that you can pass, and there's one place in particular where people go way too hot in the corner, and a lot of times that means that they slide out. That is exactly right here. I'm not sure if Lugnuts actually meant to take that line, but it gave me just enough space that I could hustle the car right next to him, and I still gave him enough room. I got all the way in front, and I was then on Zwart's butt so I could use his slipstream. Knowing when you can make moves like that will also teach you exactly when you need to be very careful and defend the inside line. For pretty much the entirety of the time that we've had this car in Gran Turismo Sport and Gran Turismo 7, it has been known to be pretty understeery, and I think it's because of the really massive and long front end. But because of the latest Bape update, for whatever reason, the car actually handles better than it ever has. I think even better than when GT7 first dropped. It would usually be unheard of for most FR cars to pass an MR car in the tricky sections of this track, especially a Z4, but I guess it's just a really beautiful time to be alive and playing Gran Turismo 7 right now. While it can be really tempting to try to pass people into the hairpin, and of course it's definitely possible, I actually passed 4 people at once on that hairpin earlier. It's a much better idea to try to set up to get a very good exit, even if you have to sacrifice a little bit of time going into the corner, so you can then use the slipstream and position yourself for a pass going into the braking zone up here. Even if you have a car that is potentially faster than yours or handles better, if you can get in front of them at this point, it's going to be very difficult for anyone to make a move on you. Unless, of course, you make some kind of crazy mistake and slide out in the tunnel. After passing Zwart, we were all the way up to 4th place, and that meant we just needed to get up to 3rd place as soon as we possibly could. Thankfully, Velosa was behind, and he always has the same idea in mind. If we work together to try to push towards the front, we can then fight it out at the very end to try to go for victory, rather than just fight each other in the middle of the race. Since we know that we both have comparable pace, we can work together and potentially attack the leaders. Knowing your opponents is very important, but also knowing the opponent's cars. Both the cars in front and behind should be able to handle much better than this car can in that twisty section, so if you can manage to stay as close to them as possible, then when it comes to the straight, this car should be able to take off with the extra power that it's got. This car definitely has a lot more power than almost all of the MR cars, especially other of the Italian cars, so just like I predicted, I was able to stay close to him through the twisty section, and I was able to get all the way in front of him. Like I talked about just a little bit, you don't necessarily want to be in front at the point that you get to this hairpin, but if you can get in front and get a very good exit out of the hairpin, you should be able to defend at the beginning, and because of the power of this car, you don't really have to worry about either of those specific MR cars getting up next to you. Now, if you do have someone behind that you want to help, you could choose to give them the slipstream, or if you know that one of the 2 people behind you is faster, you could choose to give the other person slipstream. What I was actually trying to do there was to give them equal slipstream so they'd be next to each other going into the next corner, but I waited a little bit too late, and in the end it didn't really matter because Jay completely blew his brakes, and then he was no longer a factor in the race whatsoever. Also, like I mentioned before, Velosa and I usually have very comparable pace, so it's very common of us to work together for a certain amount of time during the race, and then at the very end try to fight it out and steal victory from the other one. At this point, we're already at the point where we should go into the pits, or at least it would be a good idea. So I was just planning on going to the pits right now. Whether or not he followed me, it wasn't going to change too much, but if he did follow me, we could bump draft each other and try to go after the leaders, and if he didn't, then I could just rely on my own pace and hopefully get to the leaders without him. After having a completely clean out lap, I was able to stay in front of Velasa as he came out of the pits one lap later, and Jay had followed me into the pits, which meant that he and Velasa were once again directly next to each other. It was at that point I realized that I might be in a little bit of trouble. If you remember from, I believe, the first lap, if not the second lap, we had already passed this person, Javin Tucker, which meant that if he was in front of us, he did not go in the pits, and that meant that he had 9-lap-old tires. While I was benefiting from his slipstream, if I didn't get in front of him by the time we get to the really twisty part of the track, then he was going to definitely hold me up. There's no way 9-lap-old tires were going to be able to compete with my 2-lap-old tires. I realized that meant that I was going to have to do absolutely anything I could to get past him as soon as I possibly can, because this was going to be really huge if I was going to have to stay behind him in this twisty section. Luckily, he made just a little bit of a mistake, gave me exactly enough space to put my car in, and I took advantage of every inch of it. What was initially going to be very, very bad might actually end up in my favor, because then Velasa was going to have to pass him through the curves, and that meant I could try to get away and put as much space between myself and Velasa as possible, trying to hunt down the 2 leaders. Unfortunately for me, as you can see behind, Velasa got through really cleanly and really quickly. Like I mentioned before, this car is very powerful. It's very good in acceleration and in the straights, but it doesn't really matter with the custom slipstream, because even the car that goes much slower in the straights, the Ferrari, as long as you drive it really well, you can get close enough to make a pass, or in this situation, like I mentioned before, Velasa was able to bump draft me. I actually talk about forming alliances with people, or finding people that you really like to race with, or just doing these kinds of things with people that you race with often, and you don't even necessarily need to communicate about it. Velasa and I never once actually talk about working together. It just makes a lot of sense to work together in certain circumstances. Velasa, I think, had won the last 2 races by doing the exact same thing. You push the person that you're racing, if you know that they're fast enough, down the straights, and then when it comes to actually attacking towards the end, anything goes. If you look at the right side of the screen, you can see that this car is able to do a 26 by itself. I can actually do like a high-mid 26 by myself without slipstream or without bump drafting, but with the added benefit of that one bump draft, I was able to get a 26.3. Imagine how fast this thing could go if I had a bump draft and slipstream in front. This car is definitely capable of 25s. After accepting one more bump draft and seeing that there are only 3 laps left, it became very clear that we were going to do the same thing that we always do when we end up like this. We're going to work together until we get to the people at the front, and then we're either going to try to use them against each other or get all the way in front of them and just try to battle it out to the very end. At the end of lap 13, Fernandez got himself a 1-second penalty, so that meant the best thing to do would be staying straight behind him and then use the slipstream as much as you can, and hopefully it'll slingshot you into the leader, and that's exactly what had happened. Leading into the final lap, I found myself in a position where I could try to pass Vigo or I could try to bump draft him. Either way had its benefits and, of course, reasons to not do it. If I were to bump draft him and essentially push him down the straight, I could then try to use that positioning to stay directly behind him, leading to the back straight. But that's really tricky, and you can never really know if you can trust everyone, especially on a hairpin, to do exactly the right thing so that you can get behind and stay behind them. Luckily for me, when I did pass him, Velasa bumped me just a little bit, and that actually gave me just enough to stay all the way in front. It definitely wasn't on purpose, and in fact, I think Vigo might have hit him into me. Either way, that kind of thing happens, and I've raced with both of these guys enough to know that neither of them would have done that on purpose, and if they did it on accident, it's so rare that it's easy just to brush off. I've raced cleanly with both of these guys hundreds of times over the years, so that kind of thing doesn't matter to me whatsoever, and in fact, it just gave me an advantage here. Despite the fact that the Ferrari is extremely good in this final twisty section, I was far enough ahead that it looked like it was probably going to be impossible for anyone to make a move on me. The last thing that someone could do is try to pass on the very final corner, and if you stay on the inside, then you can just defend going to that final corner and hopefully get a better exit. It's funny that I should mention that though, because the final race I did on the stream, I had a very long and hard-fought battle with a couple guys, and at the very end, I tried to defend just like I am right here in the final corner, and I accidentally gave it a little bit too much throttle, losing out by less than 1/100th of a second. Actually, I think it was a couple hundredths of a second. Less than 1/10 of a second, though. It was pretty heartbreaking, but I was very glad that I had this victory to show you guys, and of course, just to take with me so I feel good about myself. Thank you for watching. If you liked what you saw, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And of course, I'll be making another guide every single week. To finish off, I'm going to leave you with a look at my current members. Thank you very much. I love every one of you.